Marjorie called me at 7 in the morning. Her voice was shaking. "Vivian," she said, "don't tell Claire I called. But you need to come to the office. Preston brought 2 lawyers in yesterday. They were going through your files." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone. What lawyers? I thought. What files? Why would my own son-in-law need to hide anything from me? Welcome back to The Forgotten Parent. Grab your coffee, get comfortable. Remember, the people in these stories had every chance to do right by the ones who raised them. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to stay till the end. My name is Vivian Holt. I am 74 years old. I live in Millbrook, Vermont, in a white farmhouse at the end of Cobb Hill Road. I drive a 14-year-old Subaru. It has a dent in the bumper I never bothered to fix. I wear my late husband's cardigans. They still smell faintly like his pipe tobacco. In my breast pocket, I carry his fountain pen. It doesn't write anymore. I carry it anyway. People in town see me at the grocery store, picking out day-old bread because I like the discount. There goes sweet old Vivian Holt, they think. They have no idea I sign every scholarship check this town has handed out for 40 years. That's exactly how I've always wanted it. My husband Amos and I started the foundation in 1986. We had almost nothing then. Amos worked the quarry. I taught 3rd grade. We put $1,200 into a checking account. We called it the Amos Holt Memorial Scholarship Foundation. Amos was very much alive at the time. He thought that was funny. "Feels strange being memorialized before I'm dead," he used to say. He passed 11 years ago. The name stopped being a joke. Since then, that little checking account has grown into something real. We fund 4-year scholarships for first-generation college kids. 3 counties, 4 decades, hundreds of kids. Kids whose parents work the same quarry Amos worked. Kids nobody else was betting on. I chair the board. I have chaired it since the day we founded it. I know every recipient's name. I keep their photos in a binder on my kitchen table. My daughter Claire married Preston Voss 9 years ago. Preston is smart. Preston is polished. Preston runs a small consulting firm out of Burlington called Holt Bridge Advisors. Yes, he used our family name. Yes, that should have told me something. He wears expensive shoes to Thanksgiving dinner. He calls me Mom in a voice that never quite believes it. 2 years ago, Preston asked to join our board. I was thrilled. Family, I thought. Someone to carry it forward. I nominated him myself. The other trustees liked him immediately. He was sharp in meetings. He talked about modernizing our processes. Talked about digitizing our records. He talked about growing our endowment. I sat there proud, my son-in-law, taking an interest in the thing Amos and I built with our bare hands. Looking back now, I can see it started even earlier than that. At Claire and Preston's wedding, he gave a toast. He thanked Claire's family for welcoming him into something established. Not warm, not loving. Established. I remember Amos would have caught that word instantly. I let it go. A year into their marriage, Preston asked me, almost casually, over Christmas dinner, what the foundation's total assets were. "Just curious," he said. I told him. He nodded slowly, like a man doing quiet math in his head. I thought nothing of it at the time. I think about it constantly now. That pride did not last. It started small. Preston began scheduling donor calls without telling me. I'd hear about a lunch with one of our biggest supporters only after it happened. When I asked him about it, he'd smile. "I didn't want to bother you with the administrative stuff," he'd say. I told myself that was thoughtful. Something in my stomach disagreed. Then came the comments. Small ones, dropped in meetings like pebbles. "Vivian's been running this her way for a long time. Maybe it's time for fresh eyes." No offense to Vivian, but she still tracks donations on paper. He'd laugh when he said it. Affectionate, or so it sounded. The other trustees laughed too. I laughed along. Inside, that pebble landed heavier every time. By spring, I noticed something worse. Preston had started meeting privately with 3 of our newer board members. Coffee here, lunch there, always without me. I asked our treasurer about it. She looked uncomfortable. She changed the subject fast. A thick, wrong kind of silence settled over every room I walked into. I told myself I was imagining things. Grief does strange things to a person's trust, even 11 years out. Family doesn't do what my gut was suggesting, I told myself. Preston loved Claire. Claire loved me. Surely that counted for something. There was one night that spring I almost said something. Preston and Claire came for Sunday dinner. Preston mentioned, offhand, that nonprofits really ought to run leaner. I asked him what he meant. He waved it off. Just industry talk, Mom. Don't worry about it. Claire didn't notice a thing. I noticed everything. I just didn't have proof yet. A feeling isn't proof. I've learned that the hard way, more than once in my life. I called my sister in Rutland that same week. I told her something felt off with Preston. She laughed gently and told me I'd always been suspicious of Claire's boyfriends, going back to high school. Maybe she was right, I thought. Maybe I really was just an old woman, clutching too tightly to something that had always, eventually, needed to change hands. I wish I'd trusted my own stomach sooner. I tell you that honestly, because some of you watching have felt exactly what I felt. That quiet, nagging wrongness nobody else can see yet. Trust it. I should have trusted mine 3 months earlier than I did. Then Marjorie called. Marjorie Ashcroft has kept our books since 1994. She is quiet. She is careful. She has never once exaggerated anything in her life. She also makes the worst coffee in Millbrook, on purpose, so nobody lingers past their lunch break. Amos used to call it motivational coffee. When she told me Preston brought lawyers into our small office on a Tuesday morning, I believed every word. I drove over within the hour. Our office sits above the old hardware store on Main Street. 2 rooms. A coffee maker older than my grandchildren. When I walked in, Preston was standing by the file cabinet. 2 men in suits stood beside him. Boxes of our records sat open on the table. One of the lawyers, a young man barely older than my grandson, would not meet my eyes. He kept stacking papers instead. I noticed that. I filed it away. Vivian, Preston smiled too quickly. We're just doing an operational review. Standard stuff. Whose lawyers are those, Preston? Mine, he said. For the transition. What transition? He set down the folder in his hand. The board's been talking. We think it's time the foundation had more structured leadership. Someone with real management experience. I've drafted a proposal. I felt the floor tilt slightly under me. A proposal to do what? To bring the foundation's operations under Holtbridge advisors. Full administrative control. I'd serve as executive director. You'd stay on as founder emeritus. Honorary. No day-to-day duties. He said honorary like it was a gift he was handing me. I did not raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice at that man. And the endowment? I asked. Managed through my firm. Standard fee structure. 12%. 12%. Of an endowment that took 40 years to build. Going straight into my son-in-law's consulting company. I looked at those boxes on the table. Donor histories. Grant files. Every name Amos and I had ever written a check to. In my son-in-law's lawyer's hands. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. I built this with my husband, I said quietly. And it's time it grew up, Preston said. No offense, Vivian, the board agrees with me. That was the moment the wrong fully surfaced, not slowly this time. All at once. Standing in that small office above the hardware store, holding my dead husband's pen in my pocket like an anchor. I want you to understand something about people like Preston. They don't announce themselves as villains. They arrive smiling, in good shoes, calling you Mom. They circle for years before they strike. By the time you see the whole shape of it, they've already been talking to your board for months. I left that office without another word. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table with the binder of scholarship photos in front of me. I did not cry. I got very, very quiet instead. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. I want to back up now, because you should understand what Preston was actually trying to take. Almos and I met in 1968 at a church supper neither of us wanted to attend. He was 22, home from the quarry with granite dust still under his fingernails. I was 19, saving nickels in a coffee tin for teachers' college. We married 2 years later in my mother's backyard. We had folding chairs from the fire hall and a cake my aunt burned slightly on one side. Nobody minded. We were too happy to notice. For the first 10 years, we had nothing extra. Amos worked 6 days a week. I taught 3rd grade and tutored on weekends for a little more. We saved anyway. $1 here. $2 there. Amos used to say a poor man's dollar bends the same as a rich man's. You'd better learn to fold it right. The foundation started because of a boy named Tommy Reyes. Tommy was in my class in 1985. Bright as anything. His father worked the quarry beside Amos. Tommy got into the state university on early acceptance, full of promise. Then his father's hours got cut. The family simply couldn't send him. I came home crying about it. Amos didn't say much. 2 weeks later, he handed me an envelope with $300 in it. "Give this to the Reyes boy," he said. "Anonymous. Don't tell him where it came from." That was the whole foundation, right there, in one envelope. We just kept doing it, year after year, until it needed a name. Tommy Reyes graduated in 4 years. He became a civil engineer. He builds bridges now, real ones, out in Ohio. He still sends a Christmas card every year. He'll signs it your first investment, with interest. I keep every single one in the binder, right behind his graduation photo. There were harder years, too. In 1993, a bad frost wiped out half the quarry's contracts. Donations to the foundation dropped to almost nothing. Amos took on weekend shifts, extra hours, just to keep 2 scholarships funded that year instead of cutting to 0. I remember him coming home exhausted, hands raw, and still asking me who was on the list for spring. That's the kind of man he was. Tired to the bone, and still asking about the list. I think about that a great deal now. About what Preston wanted to reduce to a management fee. The foundation isn't just money. It's 40 years of Saturday mornings. It's Amos and me driving to a family's trailer. A check taped inside a birthday card. The mother was too proud to accept charity outright. It's every kid who came back years later, diploma in hand, to shake my hand at the county fair. It's the promise Amos made me the week before he died. "Keep it small enough that you know every name, Viv," he said. "The day it stops being personal, it stops being ours." I had kept that promise for 11 years. Preston wanted to trade it for a management fee. I'll admit something to you. There was a stretch, about 6 years ago, when I nearly quit. Amos was gone. The paperwork had grown heavier every year. I sat at this same kitchen table one November night, utterly exhausted, ready to hand the whole thing to a bigger regional charity and be done with it. Then I opened the binder. I looked at Tommy Reyes's photo, the very first one, him in his cap and gown in 1990. I closed the binder. I made coffee instead. I never seriously considered quitting again. Here is what Preston didn't know, standing in that office with his lawyers and his boxes. When Amos and I founded the trust in 1986, we didn't write a simple charter. Amos was cautious that way. He'd watched 2 other local charities get hollowed out by well-meaning boards who drifted from the founder's intent. Our attorney at the time, a sharp young man named Walter Combs, built in a clause almost nobody remembered. Founding trustee veto. As long as I remained a living founding trustee, No structural change to governance could happen without my written consent. No transfer of administrative control. No alteration of fee arrangements. Not board majority. Not committee vote. Mine, alone. Walter Combs is 79 now. He still practices 2 days a week, out of a converted barn on Route 9. I called him that same evening. Walter, it's Vivian. I need you to remember something for me. I remember everything, Viv. That's the curse of a good memory and a bad hip. He listened while I told him everything. The private donor meetings, the lawyers, the 12%, the word honorary. He went very quiet on the other end. He doesn't know about the clause, Walter finally said. I don't think he does. Do you want to stop this quietly? Or do you want the board to see exactly what he tried to do? I thought about that for a long moment. I want them to see it, I said, kindly, but clearly. Here is something else Preston didn't know. Something even Claire didn't fully know. 6 years ago, an anonymous donor began making significant annual gifts to the foundation. $50,000 a year, routed through a donor-advised fund, with strict conditions attached. No naming rights, no board seat, no publicity. The gift had quietly become nearly 40% of our operating endowment. The board had spent years speculating about who this mystery donor might be. A grateful scholarship recipient who'd made good. Some guessed. A local business owner, others thought. The donor was me. After Amos died, I sold 2 parcels of land he'd left me outside of town. Land I never needed and never wanted. I put almost all of it into that fund. I never told anyone. Amos always said the best gifts are the ones nobody has to thank you for. I kept my name off it because I did not want gratitude. I wanted the foundation to survive me without depending on my name to run. Preston had spent 2 years trying to seize administrative control of an endowment that was, in real and quiet fact, largely mine to begin with. He built his entire plan on one assumption. Vivian Holt was a sweet, slightly outdated old woman, clutching a folder of paperwork she barely understood. He never once considered something simple, that the sweet old woman was also the single largest donor he was courting behind closed doors. Walter and I spent the next 3 weeks doing what Preston never expected either of us capable of. We were quiet. We were methodical. Walter pulled the original 1986 trust documents from the county recorder's office. Certified copies, dated and sealed. I met privately, one by one, with each of the 3 trustees Preston had been courting. Not to accuse him, just to ask questions. What exactly had Preston told them about my declining involvement? What had he told them about the endowment's true source? I met with Dorothy Klein first, over tea in her kitchen. Dorothy is sharp for 81, sharper than most people half her age. She'd noticed Preston's private calls, too. She just hadn't wanted to seem paranoid. Next, I met with a soft-spoken accountant named Harold Fenn, who joined our board 2 years ago. He looked genuinely rattled when I asked my questions. He told me you were tired, Vivian, Harold said. He said it kindly. I never once thought to doubt it. Then I visited Raj Patel, our newest trustee. Raj is a dentist, 34 years old, sharp as a tack. He owns an enormous golden retriever named Bumble. Bumble followed us around his kitchen the entire conversation. Dorothy poured the tea and set down 2 cups. Hers had a chip on the rim. She'd used that same chipped cup for as long as I'd known her. I always drink from the broken one first, she told me once. Keeps me honest about what actually matters. I thought about that line for days afterward. Harold showed me the emails Preston had sent him. Careful emails. Warm emails. Never a single provable lie in writing, just soft suggestion after soft suggestion. He's good, Harold admitted. Frighteningly good. Raj poured me coffee that was, thankfully, much better than Marjorie's. Bumble put his head in my lap the entire time, which I did not mind one bit. Raj told me Preston had mentioned my memory issues 3 separate times over 2 months. Small mentions. Never accusations. Just seeds planted patiently, meant to grow on their own. Each conversation revealed the same pattern. Preston had been telling trustees, gently, repeatedly, that I was stepping back due to health, that I had expressed interest in a quieter role, that the board owed it to the foundation's future to modernize. Before I wasn't able to weigh in at all, he'd say. Every one of those statements was false. I have never had so much as a doctor's appointment I couldn't drive myself to. I want to tell you about one small moment during those 3 weeks. It made me laugh out loud, alone, at my own kitchen table. I called our newest trustee, a young dentist named Raj Patel, to ask what Preston had told him about me. Raj went quiet for a second, then said, "Honestly, Mrs. Holt, he told us you'd started forgetting names, but you just called me by my full name, my dental practice, my wife's name, my dog's name, all in one sentence." I laughed until I had to sit down. Preston hadn't counted on Bumble, the golden retriever, giving him away. He had been bad-mouthing me, carefully, for the better part of a year. All to steal the one thing he assumed I no longer had the strength to defend. I called an emergency board meeting for the second Thursday in June. I told Preston it was a routine quarterly review. I wanted him relaxed. I wanted him confident. Confident men make careless promises in front of witnesses. That Thursday, all 7 trustees gathered in the community room at the library. The very same room where Amos and I held our very first board meeting, 38 years ago. Preston walked in with a leather folder and a fresh haircut. He was ready to present his transition plan as though it were already decided. "Before Preston begins," I said, "I'd like Walter Combs to say a few words. He drafted our founding trust in 1986. There's a provision the board should be reminded of before any vote today." Preston's smile flickered, just slightly. "Vivian, this is just a preliminary presentation. There's no vote scheduled. There will be, eventually," I said gently. "I'd rather everyone understand the rules before that day comes than after." Walter stood. He opened his folder. He read the veto clause aloud, slow and clear, the way a man reads something he wrote himself 40 years ago and still believes in. The room went still. I watched Preston's jaw tighten. "That clause has surely lapsed," Preston said. "It's decades old. It expires only upon my death or written resignation as a trustee," I said. "I am neither dead nor resigning." A trustee named Dorothy Klein looked at Preston carefully. "She's a retired nurse. She has sat on our board for a decade." "Preston, you told me Vivian wanted to step back. You told me that in April." "I told you what I believed to be true," Preston said. I heard, for the first time, the smallest crack of panic underneath his polish. "I have never told you that, Preston," I said. "Not once, to anyone." The room was quiet the wrong way now, the way it had been for me for months. Except now, everyone else could finally feel it too. I did something then that I had planned carefully with Walter. To this day, I still think it was the fairest thing I could have done. I did not humiliate him. I did not read his private texts aloud, though Walter had them ready. I did not mention the 12% fee in front of the newer donors present. I simply told the truth, plainly, the way Amos always told the truth. "I want to share something the board has wondered about for 6 years," I said. "Our anonymous donor. The one funding nearly 40% of our endowment." I set an envelope on the table. Inside was the original donor-advised fund paperwork, my name printed clearly at the top. "It's me. It has always been me." Preston's face changed color. Not dramatically. Quietly, the blood simply left it, the way water leaves a cracked glass, slow and total. He had spent 2 years positioning himself to manage an endowment he assumed belonged to strangers. It belonged to his mother-in-law's dead husband's land. Sold quietly. Given without a name attached. Precisely so, nobody would ever hold it over anyone's head. "You could have told me," he said, very softly. "I could have," I agreed. "But you never once asked me what this foundation meant. You only ever asked what it was worth." Nobody in that room said anything for a long moment. Then, Dorothy Klein spoke. I move we table the transition proposal indefinitely. Every hand went up except Preston's. His stayed in his lap. Harold Fenn cleared his throat. Preston, I owe you nothing further, but Vivian deserves an apology from me. I should have called her myself first, before I ever believed a word about her health. You believed it because he made it sound kind, I said. That's not a failure on your part, Harold. Kindness is exactly the disguise he chose. Preston looked up at that. Something in his face cracked open, just slightly, for the first time all evening. Not anger, something closer to shame. I want to tell you honestly, this is usually where a story like this ends with the villain destroyed. That is not what happened here, and I am glad of it. Preston is my daughter's husband. He is the father of my 2 grandchildren, Nora and Sam. They love their pop-pop's memory and their grandma Vivian fiercely. They had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. I did not want to hand them a shattered family for the sake of a satisfying ending. I wanted something truer than that. After the meeting, I asked Preston to stay behind. Just the 2 of us, in that library community room, the folding chairs still warm. I'm not removing you from the board, I told him. I want to be very clear about why. Not because you deserve to stay, because Claire deserves a husband who learns something from this. Nora and Sam deserve a father who isn't quietly resented at every holiday for the rest of his life. Preston stared at the table. Why would you do that for me? I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it for Claire, and for the version of you I still believe is somewhere underneath the expensive shoes. I laid out terms instead of punishment. He would resign immediately from any officer or leadership role. He would remain only a regular, non-voting advisory member if he chose to stay at all. Boltbridge advisors would never manage a cent of our endowment. He would personally, publicly apologize to Dorothy and the other 2 trustees he had misled. And this part was Walter's idea, and I loved it immediately. He would spend 1 Saturday a month for the next 2 years doing the unglamorous, unpaid work of the foundation, driving scholarship checks to families himself, sitting across kitchen tables from the parents Amos and I used to sit across from, learning, hands-on, what he had tried to reduce to a management fee. He didn't argue. I think some small, honest part of him had known for a while that he'd gone somewhere he shouldn't have. That was 4 months ago. I'd love to tell you Preston transformed overnight into a different man. He didn't. The first 2 Saturdays, he was stiff and uncomfortable, clearly counting the minutes, but by the 3rd family, something shifted. A single mother in Bari. 2 kids, working double shifts at the hospital. She opened her door and simply cried when she saw the envelope. Preston told me afterward, quietly, in the car, that he hadn't expected that. I thought it was just paperwork, he said. I didn't think it would feel like anything. That, I told him, is exactly what your father-in-law used to say. Claire came to see me last week. She sat at my kitchen table, the same chair she sat in as a girl doing her homework. She cried for a long time. Not because I'd exposed her husband. Because, she said, nobody had ever shown him what it actually cost to build something worth protecting. He grew up watching his father buy and sell companies, she told me. He genuinely didn't understand there was another way to matter. I think that's true. It doesn't excuse what he did. It does explain it. There's a difference. I've learned to hold both at once. The board reinstated Marjorie's title. They gave her a raise she has deserved for a decade. They also voted, unanimously, to formally name the anonymous fund. To call it what it always should have been called. Quietly, without a plaque. Without my name on any building. Just a line in the minutes that only the 7 of us will ever read. Vivian and Amos Holt, 1986, still giving. I still drive my dented Subaru. I still buy the day-old bread. I still carry Amos's pen in my cardigan pocket. Some mornings I take it out and turn it over in my fingers before I sign the newest round of scholarship checks. Preston came by last Sunday. He brought Nora and Sam, and a casserole he'd actually cooked himself, slightly burnt on one corner. He sat across from me at the same table where I once laid out an envelope that ended his takeover. He asked me, quietly, if he could see the binder. The photographs of every recipient we've ever funded. I got it down from the shelf. I set it in front of him. He turned the pages slowly, asking names, asking what happened to this one, that one. Nora leaned over his shoulder, pointing at photos, asking if she could help pick next year's kids. Sam, who is only 6, asked if he could have a fountain pen like mine someday. I told him he could have this very one when he's old enough to sign something that matters. Preston went quiet at that. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, like a man agreeing to something bigger than a pen. Marjorie stopped by that same evening. She brought a fresh binder for next year's applicants. And, true to form, a truly terrible pot of coffee. Nobody complained. We drank it anyway, all of us, at my kitchen table. Laughing about nothing in particular, the way families do when the worst has quietly passed. I think often about what Amos would say, watching all this unfold. I believe he'd be proud of the veto clause holding. I believe he'd be prouder still that I didn't use it as a weapon. Amos never once, in 40 years, raised his voice to win an argument. He simply outlasted people with patience, and let the truth do the loud part for him. I try to live that way now. Some days I manage it better than others. I think, too, about what this foundation actually is. Underneath the trust documents, underneath the veto clauses and the donor-advised funds, it is not an asset. It was never an asset, not to Amos, not to me. It is every kitchen table we ever sat at with a nervous, proud family, telling them their child's future was safe. It is the particular sound of an envelope being opened by someone who genuinely did not expect one. It is Tommy Reyes's Bridges, standing somewhere in Ohio right now, holding weight, because 2 people with almost nothing once decided a stranger's child was worth $300. That is what Preston tried to fold into a 12% fee. That is what I was never, under any circumstances, going to let him have. Some men try to take what someone else built because they've never learned to build anything themselves. The lucky ones get caught early enough. They get shown, patiently, what it actually costs. Preston is one of the lucky ones. So, I think, am I. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this family.